Picture this. Millions of young people around the world believe they can literally shift their consciousness into alternate realities where they're dating fictional characters, living in magical worlds, or experiencing completely different lives. They're not just daydreaming, they're convinced they're accessing actual parallel universes through something they call quantum shifting. And here's the strangest part. Some of them report experiences so vivid, so detailed, and so emotionally real that they're questioning the nature of reality itself. Welcome to a journey through one of the most fascinating intersections of modern physics, human psychology, and the ancient quest to understand consciousness. I'm here to guide you through the science behind these extraordinary claims, the genuine mysteries they touch upon, and what happens when we shine the light of understanding on practices that promise to reshape reality itself. Tonight, we're exploring quantum shifting, not to debunk it, not to defend it, but to understand it. Because sometimes the most profound insights come not from dismissing what seems impossible, but from asking why it feels so possible to so many people. Take a deep breath and imagine what it felt like to be young during the pandemic, locked inside, watching the world transform overnight, feeling powerless as your education, your relationships, your future seem to slip beyond your control. Now imagine discovering that, according to something called quantum physics, reality itself might be far more flexible than anyone ever told you. This is how a movement was born. In 2020, as the world went into lockdown, something extraordinary happened on social media. Hashtags like #reality shifting and #quantum jumping began accumulating millions, then billions of views. Young people weren't just talking about these concepts, they were practicing them, and they were reporting results that defied conventional understanding. Entanglement. The movement draws its inspiration from genuine quantum physics, ancient meditation practices, and a very human desire for agency in an uncertain world. Practitioners describe techniques for shifting their consciousness into what they call desired realities, or DRS. These aren't simple visualizations or daydreams. According to those who practice it, quantum shifting allows actual travel between parallel versions of existence. The process typically begins with what's called scripting, where practitioners write detailed descriptions of the reality they want to experience. They might script a visit to Hogwarts from the Harry Potter universe, a reality where they're successful musicians, or even just a version of their current life where certain painful events never happened. Then, using techniques borrowed from meditation and self-hypnosis, they attempt to shift their consciousness into these scripted realities. What makes this particularly intriguing from a scientific perspective is how practitioners describe their experiences. They don't report vague, dreamlike states. They describe sensory-rich environments where they can feel emotions, have conversations, and create memories that feel as real as any waking experience. Some claim to spend weeks in these alternate realities before returning to what they call their current reality, or CR. To understand what quantum shifting practitioners believe they're doing, we need to look at their experiences closely. And that requires a gentle journey into some of the most profound mysteries of modern physics. Quantum mechanics, developed in the early 20th century, revealed that reality, at its most fundamental level, operates according to principles that seem to defy common sense. Particles can exist in multiple states simultaneously, a phenomenon called superposition. They can be connected across vast distances through quantum entanglement. And most mysteriously, the act of measurement appears to cause a quantum system to collapse from a state of multiple possibilities into a single observed outcome. These discoveries led physicists to what's known as the measurement problem. If quantum systems exist in superposition until measured, what constitutes a measurement? And what role, if any, does consciousness play in determining which outcome becomes real? Now, it's crucial to understand that mainstream physics has developed sophisticated explanations for these phenomena that don't require consciousness to play a special role. The Copenhagen interpretation, for instance, suggests that the wave function collapse occurs due to interaction with measuring devices, not conscious observation. And quantum decoherence explains how quantum effects typically disappear at macroscopic scales due to environmental interference. However, some interpretations of quantum mechanics do leave room for consciousness to play an active role. Cubism, or quantum Bayesianism, proposes that quantum mechanics describes the beliefs of individual observers rather than objective reality itself. Quantum shifting practitioners have latched onto these interpretations, particularly many worlds, as scientific validation for their experiences. If parallel realities exist, they reason, and if consciousness has some special relationship to quantum mechanics, then perhaps shifting between them isn't just possible, it's inevitable. As you listen to this, you might find yourself wondering, could these experiences be real? And if not, what's actually happening when someone reports shifting into an alternate reality? The human capacity for vivid, convincing, subjective experience is far more extraordinary than most people realize. Consider dreams. Every night, your brain constructs entire worlds, complete with characters, plots, sensory experiences, and emotions. While dreaming, these constructed realities feel completely real. You don't question their logic or consistency. You simply experience them as your current reality. Research in neuroscience has revealed that the brain regions responsible for imagination and visualization overlap significantly with those involved in actual perception. When you vividly imagine seeing, hearing, or touching something, many of the same neural pathways activate as during real sensory experience. This is why visualization techniques used in sports psychology can actually improve physical performance. The brain in many ways doesn't distinguish between vividly imagined and actual experience. This neurological reality becomes even more relevant when we consider the specific techniques used in quantum shifting. Practitioners typically enter deeply relaxed states, often while lying down in darkness. They engage in extended visualization while counting or repeating mantras. These conditions are known to induce altered states of consciousness that can produce extraordinarily vivid and convincing experiences. Sleep paralysis, hypnagogic hallucinations, and lucid dreaming can all create experiences that feel more real than ordinary dreams. The techniques used in reality shifting, particularly those practiced while falling asleep, can naturally induce these states. From this perspective, the vivid realities reported by shifters might represent sophisticated forms of controlled dreaming or visualization rather than actual travel to parallel universes. But here's where the story becomes more complex, even if we understand the neurological basis of these experiences. Does that diminish their significance? Is a profound, transformative experience less valuable because we can explain its biological mechanisms? Take a moment to consider the power of belief itself. The placebo effect demonstrates that our expectations and beliefs can produce measurable changes in our physiology, our behavior, and our subjective experience of reality. When someone believes deeply that they can access alternate realities, this belief alone might be sufficient to produce transformative experiences. Many quantum shifting practitioners report positive changes in their lives after beginning the practice. They describe increased confidence, better relationships, and a greater sense of agency and possibility. Some report that insights gained during shifting experiences help them solve real-world problems or overcome emotional difficulties. From a psychological perspective, these benefits might arise through several mechanisms. The detailed scripting process resembles therapeutic techniques used to help people clarify their goals and values. The visualization practices can serve as a form of mental rehearsal, preparing practitioners for desired outcomes, and the belief that change is possible, even if expressed through quantum shifting language, might motivate actual behavioral changes. Consider how the practice of scripting works. Practitioners spend considerable time and energy imagining ideal versions of their lives in vivid detail. They think deeply about their relationships, their achievements, their emotional states, and their daily experiences. This process naturally leads to greater clarity about what they want from life, and potentially increases motivation to pursue those goals. The community aspect of quantum shifting also provides significant psychological benefits. Practitioners find validation, support, and a sense of belonging within online communities dedicated to the practice. For young people especially, this social connection can be profoundly meaningful, particularly during periods of isolation or uncertainty. Quantum shifting practitioners often speak about something they call coherence. They describe this as a state where thoughts, emotions, and actions all align toward the same outcome. According to this framework, traditional approaches to change fail because they create internal conflict. Someone might want to be confident but continue thinking insecure thoughts, or desire success while harboring beliefs about their inadequacy. The coherence principle suggests that transformation occurs not through force or willpower, but through alignment. When your conscious intentions, subconscious beliefs, emotional states, and actions all move in the same direction, change happens naturally and effortlessly. This idea, while expressed in quantum shifting terminology, actually aligns well with established psychological research. Studies in cognitive psychology have shown that internal consistency between values, beliefs, and behaviors promotes both mental health and goal achievement. When there's alignment between what we think we want and what we actually believe is possible, we're more likely to take effective action. The practice of quantum shifting, regardless of its metaphysical claims, might serve as an effective method for achieving this internal coherence. Through detailed visualization and emotional engagement with desired outcomes, practitioners might gradually align their subconscious beliefs with their conscious goals. However, this raises an important question that we'll explore further. If the benefits of quantum shifting can be explained through conventional psychology, what role do the quantum claims actually play? Are they necessary for the practice to work, or do they serve some other function? As we delve deeper into the quantum shifting phenomenon, we encounter what might be called the escape paradox. Many practitioners are drawn to the practice as a way of escaping difficult or unsatisfying circumstances. They want to shift into realities where they're happier, more successful, or free from current problems. This desire for escape is deeply human and understandable. When faced with circumstances that feel overwhelming or unchangeable, the possibility of simply shifting into a better reality offers hope and relief. Some practitioners report using shifting as a way to process trauma, explore different aspects of their identity, or experience relationships and situations that feel impossible in their current reality. However, the focus on escape can sometimes become problematic. Some practitioners become so invested in their desired realities that they lose engagement with their current lives. They might neglect relationships, responsibilities, or opportunities for genuine growth while waiting to shift into a reality where these challenges don't exist. Mental health professionals have expressed concern about the most extreme forms of reality-shifting practice, particularly what some practitioners call respawning, where the goal is to permanently leave the current reality and never return. While rare, these cases highlight the importance of maintaining a healthy relationship with both imagination and consensus reality. The escape paradox reveals a deeper truth about transformation. Sustainable change typically requires engaging with current reality rather than avoiding it. The insights, clarity, and motivation that can arise from shifting practices are most valuable when applied to actual circumstances and relationships. This brings us to a crucial crossroads in understanding quantum shifting. If the practice offers genuine benefits through conventional psychological mechanisms, how can we harness these benefits while maintaining a grounded relationship with reality? And what happens when we understand the true mechanisms behind experiences that feel magical or supernatural? Take a moment to imagine yourself as a quantum physicist in the 1920s, staring at experimental results that seem to mock everything you thought you knew about reality. You've just discovered that particles can exist in multiple places simultaneously, that they can be connected across impossible distances, and most bewildering of all, that the very act of looking at them changes what they are. Now imagine trying to explain this to the world without losing your professional credibility or your own sanity. This was the predicament that gave birth to what we now call the measurement problem in quantum mechanics. And it's precisely this scientific mystery that quantum shifting practitioners point to as validation for their experiences. They argue that if consciousness plays a role in quantum measurement, then perhaps it can influence reality in ways we're only beginning to understand. But here's where the story becomes both more fascinating and more grounded than the popular interpretations suggest. Modern quantum physics has developed increasingly sophisticated explanations for these mysterious phenomena, and none of them require human consciousness to possess reality-altering powers. The measurement problem, as it's understood today, isn't really about consciousness at all. When physicists speak of an observer in quantum mechanics, they're referring to any system that can record information about a quantum state. This could be a photon detector, a computer, or even a single atom that becomes entangled with the system being measured. The observation that causes wave function collapse doesn't require awareness, intention, or consciousness. It simply requires interaction. Consider quantum decoherence, one of the most important developments in our understanding of quantum mechanics. This process explains how quantum systems lose their quantum properties when they interact with their environment. In the warm, noisy environment of everyday reality, quantum superpositions and entanglements typically disappear in tiny fractions of a second. This is why we don't see macroscopic objects existing in multiple states simultaneously. Not because they lack consciousness to observe them, but because they're constantly interacting with countless other particles. Yet even as we develop these scientific explanations, something profound remains. The quantum realm does reveal that reality at its most fundamental level operates according to principles that challenge our intuitive understanding. And there's something deeply moving about the fact that human consciousness, which emerged from this quantum reality, now contemplates its own quantum origins. As you sit here listening to this, photons are striking your retina, electrons are flowing through your nervous system, and quantum processes are occurring throughout your brain. You are quite literally a macroscopic expression of quantum mechanics. But this doesn't mean that your thoughts can directly manipulate quantum systems any more than understanding aerodynamics allows you to fly by flapping your arms. The scale problem in quantum consciousness theories is often overlooked by those seeking to connect mind and quantum reality. Quantum effects, while fundamental to the universe, typically become negligible at the scales relevant to neural processing. The brain operates in a warm, wet, noisy environment, where quantum coherence, the delicate state required for quantum effects to persist, is constantly being destroyed by thermal motion and molecular interactions. However, this doesn't mean that quantum mechanics is irrelevant to consciousness. Recent research has explored whether certain biological systems might have evolved ways to maintain quantum coherence for brief periods, allowing them to harness quantum effects for specific functions. Some scientists have proposed that quantum processes might play a role in photosynthesis, bird navigation, or even aspects of cognition. These investigations remain speculative and controversial within the scientific community. What they suggest is not that consciousness can manipulate quantum systems at will, but that biological systems might be more quantum mechanically sophisticated than previously assumed. It's a far cry from the reality-shifting claims of quantum jumping, but it opens fascinating questions about the relationship between mind and quantum reality. The appeal of quantum consciousness theories often lies in their promise of human specialness, the idea that our minds possess unique powers to influence reality. But perhaps there's something even more profound in the scientific understanding. We are conscious beings who emerged from a quantum universe, capable of contemplating and understanding the very processes that gave rise to us. We don't need special powers to be miraculous. We already are miraculous. Breathe deeply for a moment and consider the extraordinary theatre that operates within your skull every moment of every day. Your brain constructs not just your experience of reality, but multiple potential realities simultaneously. When you imagine different scenarios, plan for various outcomes, or even worry about possible futures, you're engaging in a sophisticated form of reality simulation. This capacity for mental time travel and reality modeling is one of the most remarkable features of human consciousness. And it provides a compelling explanation for the vivid experiences reported by quantum shifting practitioners. When someone engages in detailed visualization while in a relaxed meditative state, they're not accessing parallel universes. They're accessing the incredible power of their own mind to create convincing simulated realities. Neuroscience has revealed that imagined experiences activate many of the same brain regions as actual experiences. When you vividly imagine walking through a forest, your visual cortex becomes active. When you imagine a conversation, your auditory processing centers respond. When you imagine touching something soft, your somatosensory cortex fires. This is why visualization techniques can be so powerful for learning, healing, and personal development. The techniques used in quantum shifting, deep relaxation, focused attention, emotional engagement, and detailed visualization are precisely the conditions that maximize this natural capacity for experiential simulation. Practitioners aren't discovering quantum loopholes in reality, they're discovering the remarkable plasticity and power of their own consciousness. But here's what makes this understanding more rather than less profound. If your brain can create experiences so vivid and meaningful that they feel like travel to alternate realities, what does this tell us about the nature of all experience? How much of what you consider real reality is actually a construction of your nervous system, a simulation created by billions of neurons working together to create a coherent sense of being in the world. These questions lead us towards some of the deepest mysteries in neuroscience and philosophy of mind, and they suggest that the quantum shifters, while perhaps mistaken about the mechanism of their experiences, may be touching on something profound about the constructed nature of all conscious experience. Take a moment to imagine what it feels like to discover that you're not alone in experiencing something that seems impossible to explain. For many quantum shifting practitioners, finding online communities of others who share similar experiences provides validation and belonging that might be difficult to find elsewhere. This social dimension of the quantum shifting phenomenon reveals something important about human nature. We are meaning-making creatures who seek not just individual understanding, but shared understanding. We want our experiences to be witnessed, validated, and integrated into a larger framework of meaning. The online communities that have formed around quantum shifting serve several important functions beyond just discussing techniques. They provide emotional support for practitioners who might feel isolated or misunderstood. They offer a framework for interpreting unusual experiences, and they create a sense of purpose and identity for people who might feel disconnected from conventional paths of meaning-making. However, these communities can also create echo chambers that reinforce beliefs without critical examination. When everyone in your social network shares the same interpretation of reality, it becomes increasingly difficult to question that interpretation. The algorithms of social media platforms tend to show users more of the content they engage with, further reinforcing existing beliefs. This is where the understanding we're developing becomes crucial. If we can appreciate the genuine benefits that practitioners derive from their communities, the sense of belonging, the framework for growth, the mutual support, while also maintaining a grounded understanding of the actual mechanisms at work, we might find ways to preserve the positive aspects while avoiding potential pitfalls. The human need for transcendent experience and community is real and valid. The question is whether we can meet these needs through practices that enhance rather than distort our relationship with reality. As we approach a deeper understanding of quantum shifting, we encounter a fascinating paradox. Does scientific explanation diminish the value of experiences that feel magical or transcendent? When we understand that a profound visualization might be just a neurological process rather than travel to a parallel universe, does this make it less meaningful or transformative? This question touches on some of the deepest issues in the relationship between science and human meaning. Some people feel that scientific explanation reduces the mystery and wonder of existence. Others find that understanding enhances appreciation by revealing the true complexity and elegance of natural processes. Consider the experience of seeing a beautiful sunset. When you understand that the colours are caused by light scattering through atmospheric particles, does this make the sunset less beautiful? Or does it add another layer of appreciation for the intricate physics that creates such beauty? Many practitioners of quantum shifting might initially resist scientific explanations of their experiences. If shifting is just visualization or just a neurological process, they might worry that this invalidates their experiences or makes them somehow false. But here's a different perspective. Understanding the true mechanisms behind transformative experiences might actually enhance their power rather than diminish it. When you understand how visualization affects the brain, you can use it more skillfully. When you understand how belief influences behavior, you can harness this knowledge more effectively. When you understand how community provides meaning and support, you can create better communities. The experiences reported by quantum shifters, the sense of possibility, the emotional healing, the expanded identity, the feelings of connection and purpose, these remain real and valuable regardless of their ultimate mechanism. Understanding doesn't negate value, it can illuminate how to cultivate value more effectively. Breathe gently and consider this. What if the most profound aspect of the quantum shifting phenomenon isn't whether it literally involves travel to parallel realities, but what it reveals about human potential for transformation and transcendence? The practitioners who report positive changes from quantum shifting aren't necessarily deluded or misguided. They may be accessing genuine capacities for growth, healing, and expanded awareness through practices that, while scientifically misunderstood, are psychologically and spiritually meaningful. This presents what we might call the integration challenge. How do we honor the genuine insights and benefits that people derive from practices like quantum shifting, while also maintaining intellectual honesty about their actual mechanisms? One approach is to reframe these practices in terms of their psychological and spiritual functions, rather than their supposed quantum mechanisms. Visualization can be understood as a powerful tool for mental rehearsal, emotional processing, and goal clarification. Community can be appreciated for its role in providing meaning, support, and identity. The sense of expanded possibility can be valued for its motivational and therapeutic effects. From this perspective, the quantum language becomes less important than the underlying human capacities being explored. The practices work not because they access parallel realities, but because they access underutilized potentials within our own consciousness and psychology. This reframing doesn't diminish the profundity of the experiences. If anything, it grounds them in the actual miraculous nature of human consciousness. Our capacity for imagination, transformation, growth, and transcendence within the reality we actually inhabit. But this integration requires something that can be challenging in our polarized world: the ability to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously. We must be able to appreciate both the scientific understanding of these phenomena and the human meaning they carry for practitioners. As you contemplate these ideas, notice how they might apply to other areas of your life, where apparent contradictions between scientific understanding and personal meaning arise. How might we navigate these tensions with both intellectual honesty and human compassion? Take a quiet breath and consider this extraordinary puzzle. Every single experience you've ever had, every color you've seen, every emotion you've felt, every thought you've thought, has occurred within something that science still cannot fully explain. Consciousness itself remains one of the deepest mysteries in the universe. And here's where our journey into quantum shifting takes a fascinating turn. Because the more we understand about consciousness, the more we realize how little we actually know. When you close your eyes right now and visualize a red rose, something remarkable happens. Neurons fire in patterns, electrical signals cascade through your brain, and somehow, mysteriously, the subjective experience of redness emerges. Science can map every neural pathway involved, measure every chemical reaction, but it still cannot explain how these physical processes give rise to the felt sense of being you. This is what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. And it's precisely this explanatory gap that allows practices like quantum shifting to feel so plausible to practitioners. If we don't understand how consciousness works in ordinary reality, how can we be certain about what it can or cannot do in extraordinary circumstances? David Chalmers, one of the foremost philosophers of consciousness, has pointed out that we can explain all the functional aspects of consciousness, all the information processing, all the behavioural responses, but we still cannot explain why there is something it is like to be conscious at all. Why isn't the brain just a sophisticated biological computer that processes information without any inner experience? This mystery creates space for speculation, and that space is where quantum shifting practitioners have built their interpretations. They reason that if consciousness is already mysterious, if it already seems to transcend purely physical explanation, then perhaps it has capabilities we haven't yet recognized or understood. The appeal of this reasoning is understandable. Consciousness does seem to possess qualities that feel non-physical. Your thoughts don't have mass or charge. Your emotions don't occupy space in the conventional sense. Your sense of self seems to exist independently of any particular brain cell or neural pathway. These qualities can make consciousness feel like something beyond the purely material world. However, it's important to note that the mystery of consciousness doesn't necessarily imply that it has supernatural powers. Many complex phenomena in science were mysterious before we developed adequate explanations. The fact that we don't yet fully understand consciousness doesn't mean it operates outside the laws of physics. Yet this uncertainty leaves room for wonder, and perhaps that's exactly where we need to be as we explore these questions together. As you listen to these words, something extraordinary is happening in your mind. You're not just processing information or decoding symbols. You're creating meaning, forming images, perhaps even having emotional responses to ideas that exist only as patterns of sound or text. This capacity for meaning-making, for experiencing rich inner worlds, provides another lens through which to understand the quantum shifting phenomenon. Consider how stories work on us. When you read a compelling novel or watch an engaging film, your brain doesn't just process the narrative intellectually. You experience emotions. Your heart rate might change. You might even physically tense up during suspenseful moments. Your nervous system responds to fictional events as if they were real, because in a very important sense, they are real within the theatre of your consciousness. This suggests a different way of understanding what happens during quantum shifting experiences. Rather than asking whether practitioners literally travel to alternate realities, we might ask, what does it mean for an experience to feel completely real within the context of consciousness? And what are the implications when someone has an experience so vivid and meaningful that it transforms their understanding of themselves and their possibilities? Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio has written extensively about how our brains construct our sense of reality through constant storytelling. Every moment, your nervous system is weaving together sensory information, memories, emotions, and predictions to create a coherent narrative of being you in the world. This process is so seamless that you rarely notice it's happening. But during altered states of consciousness, whether induced through meditation, visualization, or the techniques used in quantum shifting, this normal narrative construction can be modified or expanded. The boundaries between imagination and perception can become more fluid. The usual constraints of time and space can feel less rigid. The sense of what's possible can dramatically expand. From this perspective, quantum shifting might represent a sophisticated form of conscious reality modeling. Practitioners aren't accessing parallel universes, but they are accessing the remarkable capacity of consciousness to create alternative models of reality that feel completely authentic and can have profound psychological effects. This doesn't diminish the significance of these experiences. If consciousness is the foundation of all our experience of reality, then experiences within consciousness have a fundamental authenticity regardless of their correspondence to external events. Think about it this way. When you have a meaningful dream, the meaning doesn't depend on the dream events actually happening in physical reality. The significance lies in how the experience affects you, what it reveals about your concerns and desires, how it might change your perspective or emotions. Pause for a moment and reflect on how your beliefs about what's possible influence what you actually experience. If you believe that you can learn a new skill, you're more likely to persist through difficulties and ultimately succeed. If you believe that you're capable of forming meaningful relationships, you're more likely to behave in ways that create those connections. This relationship between belief and experience becomes particularly relevant when we consider quantum shifting. Many practitioners report that their experiences become more vivid and convincing as their belief in the practice grows. Skeptics might interpret this as evidence that the experiences are merely psychological. But perhaps we need to reconsider what merely psychological actually means. Psychological processes have real effects on behavior, emotion, physiology, and life outcomes. The placebo effect demonstrates that beliefs about healing can produce measurable improvements in health. The self-fulfilling prophecy shows how expectations about others can influence their actual behavior. Visualization techniques used by athletes can improve physical performance. When quantum shifting practitioners report increased confidence, better relationships, or greater clarity about their goals after shifting experiences, these changes might be understood as the natural result of engaging in intensive visualization and belief work rather than evidence of parallel universe travel. Consider how the practice of scripting works. Practitioners spend considerable time imagining ideal scenarios in vivid detail. They think deeply about their relationships, their achievements, their emotional states. This process naturally leads to greater clarity about their values and desires. It also functions as a form of mental rehearsal for desired outcomes. The belief that transformation is possible, even if expressed through quantum shifting language, might motivate actual behavioral changes. Someone who believes they've experienced a reality where they're confident and successful might begin acting more confidently in their current reality. This creates a feedback loop. Belief influences behavior, behavior influences outcomes, and positive outcomes reinforce belief. The quantum shifting framework provides a compelling narrative structure for this process, even if the mechanism is psychological rather than quantum mechanical. But here's what's particularly fascinating. This feedback loop might work regardless of whether practitioners understand its actual mechanism. Sometimes the story we tell ourselves about change is less important than the fact that the story supports the change itself. As you contemplate these ideas, you might be wondering, if quantum shifting works through conventional psychological mechanisms, does understanding this enhance or diminish the practice? This question touches on something profound about the relationship between knowledge and experience. Some practitioners might worry that scientific explanation reduces the magic of their experiences. If shifting is just visualization, they might feel that this invalidates what felt transcendent or miraculous. Others might find that understanding enhances their practice by allowing them to use it more skillfully and effectively. There's precedent for both responses in other areas of human experience. Some people find that understanding how music works mathematically doesn't diminish their emotional response to beautiful compositions. Others prefer not to analyze their aesthetic experiences too deeply, feeling that knowledge interferes with pure appreciation. Perhaps the most productive approach lies in recognizing that understanding and experience operate on different levels. You can simultaneously appreciate that a sunset is caused by light scattering through atmospheric particles and find it deeply moving and beautiful. The scientific explanation doesn't negate the aesthetic experience, it adds another layer of appreciation. Similarly, understanding that quantum shifting experiences arise from the remarkable capacities of consciousness rather than parallel universe travel doesn't necessarily make them less meaningful or transformative. It might simply ground them in the actual miracle of human awareness and imagination. This perspective suggests that the question isn't whether quantum shifting works in the literal sense claimed by practitioners, but whether it serves beneficial functions for those who engage with it. Does it help people clarify their values and goals? Does it provide a sense of possibility and agency? Does it offer a framework for processing emotions and experiences? Does it create community and belonging? If the answer to these questions is yes, then the practice has value regardless of its quantum claims. The challenge becomes finding ways to preserve these benefits while maintaining intellectual honesty about the actual mechanisms involved. Take a breath and notice how this reframing might apply to other areas of your life, where meaning and scientific understanding intersect. How do you navigate the relationship between what feels true and what is demonstrably true? How do you honor both rational analysis and subjective experience? Breathe gently and consider this. Perhaps the most profound aspect of the quantum shifting phenomenon isn't what it reveals about parallel realities, but what it reveals about the human hunger for transcendence, meaning, and expanded possibility. In a world that often feels mechanical, deterministic, and constrained, practices like quantum shifting offer a sense of agency and wonder that many people desperately crave. This hunger for transcendence is deeply human and historically universal. Every culture has developed practices and beliefs that point towards something beyond ordinary experience. Whether through religion, philosophy, art, or science itself, humans consistently seek to understand their place in a larger cosmic context and to experience states of consciousness that feel more expansive than everyday awareness. Quantum shifting can be understood as a contemporary expression of this ancient impulse. It combines elements of modern science, ancient meditation practices, and digital age community formation to create a framework for exploring expanded possibilities of consciousness and identity. The timing of its emergence during the pandemic is significant. When external circumstances feel constraining or overwhelming, the appeal of practices that promise expanded agency and possibility naturally increases. Young people, in particular, found themselves with limited control over their educational, social, and economic prospects. Quantum shifting offered a sense of control and possibility when traditional paths forward seemed blocked, but the phenomenon also reflects something deeper about contemporary culture. We live in an age of unprecedented scientific knowledge, yet many people feel disconnected from a sense of wonder and mystery about existence. Quantum shifting attempts to restore that sense of wonder by suggesting that reality itself is far more malleable and consciousness far more powerful than conventional wisdom suggests. This presents an interesting challenge for science education and communication. How do we convey the genuine wonder and mystery present in scientific understanding while also maintaining appropriate skepticism about unfounded claims? How do we nurture the human need for transcendence without encouraging delusion or magical thinking? Perhaps the answer lies in recognizing that science itself is a profound spiritual practice. The investigation of consciousness, the exploration of quantum mechanics, the study of cosmology and evolution, these endeavors reveal genuinely mysterious and awe-inspiring aspects of existence. We don't need to misinterpret quantum mechanics to find transcendence. We can find it in the actual mysteries that science uncovers. The quantum realm really is strange and wonderful. Consciousness really is mysterious and remarkable. The universe really is vast and interconnected in ways that challenge our everyday assumptions. These truths might be even more profound than the claims of quantum shifting because they're actually supported by evidence and investigation. As you reflect on everything we've explored together, you might notice an interesting tension emerging. On one hand, we've seen how quantum shifting experiences can be understood through conventional psychology and neuroscience. On the other hand, we've acknowledged the genuine mystery surrounding consciousness itself and the legitimate wonder present in quantum mechanics. This tension points toward what might be the most important skill for navigating our complex world: the ability to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously without falling into either rigid skepticism or uncritical belief. We can appreciate both the scientific understanding of phenomena and the human meaning they carry for those who experience them. Consider how this applies to the practitioners of quantum shifting who have found genuine value in their experiences. Their reported benefits, increased confidence, emotional healing, greater clarity about goals and values, enhanced sense of possibility. These outcomes are real regardless of the mechanism that produces them. The challenge is finding ways to preserve and cultivate these benefits while grounding them in accurate understanding rather than potentially misleading explanations. This requires what we might call skillful integration, the ability to extract the valuable elements of a practice while updating its theoretical framework. For example, the scripting techniques used in quantum shifting could be reframed as powerful tools for goal clarification and mental rehearsal. The visualization practices could be understood as methods for emotional processing and creative exploration. The community aspects could be appreciated for their role in providing support and belonging. This kind of integration doesn't diminish the transformative potential of these practices. If anything, it might enhance their effectiveness by allowing practitioners to use them more skillfully and avoid potential pitfalls associated with unrealistic expectations or disconnection from consensus reality. The art of integration also applies more broadly to how we navigate the relationship between science and meaning in our lives. We don't have to choose between rational understanding and wonder, between skeptical analysis and open-minded exploration. We can cultivate both simultaneously. This might mean approaching extraordinary claims with curiosity rather than immediate dismissal, while also maintaining appropriate standards of evidence and reasoning. It might mean appreciating the subjective value of practices and experiences, while also seeking to understand their objective mechanisms. It might mean honouring both the human need for meaning and the importance of intellectual honesty. As you consider how these ideas might apply in your own life, notice the places where you encounter tension between what feels meaningful and what seems scientifically plausible. How might you navigate these tensions with both openness and discernment? Take a moment to step back from all the specific details we've explored about quantum shifting and consider the deeper current that runs through this entire phenomenon. At its heart, this is a story about human beings seeking to understand and expand their relationship with consciousness, reality, and possibility. The practitioners of quantum shifting aren't fundamentally different from the mystics, philosophers, and scientists who have always pushed at the boundaries of human understanding. They're asking profound questions about the nature of experience, the limits of possibility, and the relationship between mind and reality. These are questions worth asking, even if the answers they've found require updating. There's something beautiful about the fact that young people, faced with unprecedented global challenges and uncertainties, have turned toward practices that emphasize agency, possibility, and the power of consciousness. Even if their understanding of quantum mechanics is imprecise, their intuition that consciousness is remarkable and that reality might be more flexible than it appears contains wisdom worth honouring. The genuine mysteries we've touched on, the hard problem of consciousness, the strange implications of quantum mechanics, the remarkable capacities of the human brain for simulation and meaning-making. These point toward aspects of existence that remain genuinely mysterious and awe-inspiring. Perhaps what quantum shifting practitioners have intuited, despite their theoretical misunderstandings, is that we live in a universe far stranger and more wonderful than our everyday experience suggests. They've sensed that consciousness is more remarkable than we typically recognize, that our models of reality are limited and provisional, and that human beings possess capacities for growth and transformation that we've barely begun to explore. These intuitions align with some of the deepest insights of both contemplative traditions and modern science. Consciousness is mysterious. Reality at the quantum level does operate according to principles that challenge common sense. The brain does possess remarkable capacities for plasticity and change. Human beings do have profound potential for growth and transformation. The task before us isn't to dismiss these insights, but to ground them in understanding that enhances rather than distorts our relationship with reality. We can honour the mystery of consciousness without claiming it has supernatural powers. We can appreciate the strangeness of quantum mechanics without misappropriating it for human-scale phenomena. We can cultivate practices that support growth and healing while maintaining clear boundaries between subjective experience and objective claims. This approach preserves what is valuable in the quantum shifting phenomenon while avoiding its potential pitfalls. It allows us to continue exploring the frontiers of consciousness and possibility while maintaining the intellectual honesty that genuine inquiry requires. And perhaps most importantly, it recognizes that the actual mysteries of existence, consciousness, quantum mechanics, and human potential are profound enough to sustain a lifetime of wonder and exploration without requiring us to believe in claims that lack adequate support. Breathe slowly and imagine this. Every word you've ever spoken has been carried by quantum fields. Every thought you've ever formed has emerged from quantum processes, and every moment of awareness you've experienced has been shaped by the most fundamental forces in the universe. Yet our inner experiences might relate to the outer world of particles and waves. We encounter something unexpected. The very language we use to describe transformation begins to break down. This breakdown isn't a failure of communication. It's a doorway into understanding why practices like quantum shifting feel so compelling to those who experience them, even when their scientific explanations fall short. Because the gap between subjective experience and objective measurement reveals something profound about the nature of both consciousness and reality itself. Consider how transformation actually works in your own life. When you've experienced genuine change, whether learning a new skill, overcoming a fear, or shifting your perspective on a difficult situation, how would you describe what happened? You might say you saw things differently, or felt a shift, or everything clicked into place. These metaphors point towards something real, but they don't capture the precise mechanism of change. The language we use for transformation is inherently metaphorical because change itself involves processes that span multiple levels of reality simultaneously. Neural patterns shift, hormonal balances adjust, behavior modifications occur, social dynamics evolve, and somehow, through all of these physical processes, the subjective sense of being you transforms in ways that feel qualitatively different. This is where the quantum shifting phenomenon becomes particularly illuminating. Practitioners have intuited something important about the nature of transformation, that it involves fundamental shifts in how we relate to possibility itself. Their language of shifting realities and quantum jumping represents an attempt to capture experiences that feel more profound than simple behavioral change or positive thinking. While their quantum mechanical explanations may be scientifically inaccurate, their phenomenological descriptions often ring true. They describe experiences of expanded possibility, of accessing aspects of themselves that felt previously unavailable, of sudden insights that reorganize their entire understanding of what's possible in their lives. From a neuroscientific perspective, these descriptions align well with what we know about neuroplasticity and the brain's capacity for rapid reorganization. Intensive visualization and meditation practices can indeed produce measurable changes in brain structure and function. These changes can feel subjectively like accessing entirely new realities because, in a very real sense, they are. The brain that emerges from transformative practice is neurologically different from the brain that began it. Take a moment to consider how we understand complex phenomena at different levels of analysis. When you feel love for someone, is this just a cascade of neurochemicals? When you appreciate beauty, is this merely the activation of specific brain circuits? When you experience a sense of meaning or purpose, is this only the result of evolutionary programming? These reductive explanations capture something true about the mechanisms involved, but they don't capture the full reality of the experience. Love is both a neurochemical cascade and something that transforms lives. Beauty is both a brain state and something that inspires art and poetry. Meaning is both an evolutionary adaptation and something that gives direction to human existence. This multi-level understanding becomes crucial when we examine practices like quantum shifting. At the neurological level, we can describe the brain states involved in visualization and meditation. At the psychological level, we can understand the cognitive and emotional processes that produce feelings of transformation. At the social level, we can analyze the community dynamics that support and reinforce these experiences. But none of these levels of explanation negates the others. The fact that we can understand the psychological mechanisms behind transformative visualization doesn't make the experiences less meaningful or effective. If anything, understanding multiple levels simultaneously gives us a richer appreciation for the complexity of human consciousness and the various pathways through which change can occur. Quantum shifting practitioners have developed sophisticated phenomenological descriptions of transformation that deserve serious consideration, even when their theoretical frameworks require updating. They've identified practices that reliably produce specific types of experiences, created communities that support exploration and growth, and developed language that captures subtle aspects of consciousness that are often overlooked in more conventional approaches. The challenge is integrating these insights with scientific understanding in ways that preserve their value while grounding them in accurate knowledge. This requires what we might call explanatory humility, recognizing that our current scientific models, while powerful, are still provisional and incomplete. Consider the phenomenon of emergence, how complex properties arise from simpler components in ways that aren't easily predictable from knowledge of the components alone. Consciousness emerges from neural activity, but we still don't fully understand how. Life emerges from chemistry, but the transition from non-living to living systems remains mysterious. Perhaps transformation emerges from the interaction of belief, practice, and neural plasticity in ways that our current models don't fully capture. As you reflect on these ideas, you might notice something interesting about how understanding itself works. When an explanation truly illuminates something for you, it often feels like recognition rather than learning. It's as if the understanding was already present in some form, waiting to be activated by the right conceptual framework. This suggests that the relationship between experience and explanation is more complex than simple cause and effect. Sometimes experiences lead to the development of explanatory frameworks. Sometimes frameworks enable new experiences. And sometimes, as in the case of quantum shifting, imprecise frameworks nevertheless facilitate genuine experiences that require more accurate explanations. The practitioners who report transformative quantum shifting experiences aren't necessarily wrong about what they've experienced. They may be wrong about the mechanisms involved, but the experiences themselves, the expanded sense of possibility, the emotional breakthroughs, the shifts in self-perception, these can be understood as genuine phenomena worthy of careful study and integration. This points toward what we might call the resonance effect in transformative practices. Effective practices often work because they resonate with deep patterns in human psychology and neurology, even when their theoretical explanations are inadequate. The resonance occurs at the level of lived experience rather than conceptual understanding. Consider how myths and stories work. They don't provide literal descriptions of historical events, but they can convey profound truths about human nature and the structure of meaningful experience. Similarly, the quantum shifting framework might function more like a transformative myth than a scientific theory, providing a structure that enables certain types of experiences without necessarily providing accurate causal explanations. From this perspective, the question isn't whether quantum shifting is literally true, but whether it serves beneficial functions for those who engage with it. Does it help people access unused potentials? Does it provide a framework for processing difficult emotions? Does it create conditions that support growth and healing? If the answer is yes, then the practice has value even if its theoretical foundations require revision. The art becomes finding ways to preserve what works while updating what doesn't, maintaining the transformative power while improving the accuracy of understanding. Take a breath and notice how this might apply to other areas of your life, where you found value in practices or beliefs that you later came to understand differently. Did the updated understanding diminish the value of your earlier experiences, or did it provide a foundation for a more skillful engagement? Breathe gently and imagine consciousness as a kind of instrument, exquisitely sensitive to subtle changes in thought, emotion, and attention, capable of detecting patterns and possibilities that aren't immediately obvious to analytical thinking. Like any sensitive instrument, consciousness requires calibration to function optimally. This metaphor provides another lens through which to understand transformative practices like quantum shifting. Rather than accessing parallel realities, practitioners might be engaged in a sophisticated form of consciousness calibration, learning to detect and amplify subtle signals that are usually overwhelmed by the noise of everyday mental activity. The techniques used in quantum shifting, deep relaxation, focused visualization, emotional engagement, are precisely the conditions that optimize consciousness for detecting these subtle signals. In states of deep relaxation, the nervous system becomes more sensitive to internal processes. Focused visualization trains attention to work with mental imagery in increasingly sophisticated ways. Emotional engagement provides the energy and motivation necessary for sustained practice. Through regular engagement with these practices, practitioners develop what we might call enhanced proprioception of consciousness, a more refined awareness of their own mental and emotional states. This enhanced awareness can feel like accessing new realities because it provides access to aspects of experience that were previously unconscious or unnoticed. Consider how musicians develop increasingly sophisticated hearing through practice. A trained musician can detect subtle differences in pitch, timbre, and timing that are completely inaudible to untrained listeners. Similarly, contemplative practitioners can develop increasingly refined awareness of mental and emotional processes that remain below the threshold of ordinary consciousness. This enhanced sensitivity can produce insights and perspectives that feel radically new, even though they emerge from the same fundamental neural processes. The newness lies not in accessing external parallel realities, but in accessing previously unexplored territories within the landscape of consciousness itself. From this perspective, the reports of quantum shifters about accessing alternate versions of themselves might be understood as accessing alternate potentials within their own consciousness. The different realities they experience might represent different configurations of attention, emotion, and identity that are always potentially available but rarely explored. This reframing preserves the genuine novelty and value of these experiences while grounding them in processes that are actually occurring within the practitioner's own nervous system. It suggests that consciousness contains far more complexity and potential than we typically recognize, without requiring us to invoke parallel universes or quantum mechanical explanations. As you contemplate these various perspectives on consciousness and transformation, you might begin to see how they could be woven together into a more comprehensive understanding. Rather than choosing between scientific explanation and subjective experience, we might develop what could be called an integration matrix, a framework that honors multiple levels of truth simultaneously. At the phenomenological level, quantum shifting experiences are real and meaningful for those who have them. The sense of expanded possibility, the emotional breakthroughs, the shifts in identity and perspective, these represent genuine changes in the quality and content of conscious experience. At the psychological level, these experiences can be understood through well-established principles of cognitive psychology, neuroscience, and therapeutic practice. Visualization affects neural pathways, belief influences behavior, community provides support and validation, and intensive practice can produce lasting changes in mental and emotional patterns. At the social level, the quantum shifting phenomenon represents a contemporary expression of the universal human search for transcendence, meaning, and expanded possibility. It provides community and identity for practitioners, while also reflecting broader cultural tensions between scientific materialism and spiritual seeking. At the philosophical level, the phenomenon raises profound questions about the relationship between consciousness and reality, the nature of subjective experience, and the limits of scientific explanation. These questions remain open and worthy of continued exploration. This multi-level understanding doesn't resolve all tensions or answer all questions. Instead, it provides a framework for holding complexity without falling into either reductive scientism or uncritical belief. It allows us to appreciate both the genuine insights present in transformative practices and the importance of grounding those insights in accurate understanding. Perhaps most importantly, this approach models a way of thinking that might be increasingly necessary in our complex world: the ability to navigate between different types of truth claims without losing either intellectual rigor or openness to mystery. Consider how this integration matrix might apply to other areas where science and subjective experience intersect. How might we understand love, creativity, meaning, or spiritual experience through multiple lenses simultaneously? What would it look like to honor both empirical investigation and phenomenological exploration? Take a moment to step back even further and consider quantum shifting within the broader context of human evolution and cultural development. Throughout history, humans have developed practices for altering consciousness, exploring identity, and accessing expanded states of awareness. These practices have taken many forms: ritual, ceremony, meditation, art, music, storytelling, and more recently, technological augmentation. Each era has produced its own vocabulary and conceptual frameworks for understanding these practices. Ancient shamans spoke of spirit worlds and soul travel. Medieval mystics used the language of divine union and transcendent experience. Modern psychologists discuss altered states of consciousness and peak experiences. Contemporary practitioners draw on quantum physics and neuroscience. While the explanatory frameworks vary dramatically across cultures and historical periods, the underlying human capacities being explored remain remarkably consistent. People seek to transcend ordinary consciousness, access expanded possibilities of identity and experience, process difficult emotions, and connect with sources of meaning and purpose that feel larger than their key individual concerns. From this evolutionary perspective, quantum shifting represents the latest iteration of this ancient human impulse, dressed in the language and concepts of our current scientific worldview. The specific vocabulary of quantum mechanics and parallel realities reflects our contemporary attempt to make sense of timeless human experiences, using the most sophisticated conceptual tools available to us. This doesn't diminish the significance of these practices or experiences. If anything, it suggests that they tap into fundamental aspects of human nature that have been recognized and cultivated across cultures and throughout history. The consistency of these patterns across such diverse contexts suggests that they reflect something important about the structure of consciousness itself. The challenge for our era is developing frameworks that honor both the universal aspects of these experiences and the specific insights available through contemporary scientific understanding. We need approaches that preserve the transformative potential of contemplative practices while grounding them in accurate knowledge about how consciousness actually works. This might require developing new forms of literacy, the ability to navigate fluently between scientific and phenomenological descriptions, to appreciate both empirical evidence and subjective experience, to distinguish between different types of truth claims without dismissing any of them categorically. As you reflect on your own relationship to transformative practices and experiences, notice how you navigate between different ways of understanding and describing them. What frameworks do you find most helpful for integrating intellectual understanding with lived experience? Breathe deeply and consider this curious fact. As we study consciousness using consciousness, we encounter a fundamental recursivity that complicates all our investigations. The instrument of investigation, awareness itself, is also the phenomenon being investigated. This creates a kind of recursive mirror, where consciousness observes itself observing itself infinitely. This recursive quality might help explain why practices like quantum shifting feel so compelling to practitioners. When consciousness turns its attention toward its own processes with sufficient intensity and focus, the normal boundaries between observer and observed begin to blur. The usual sense of a fixed self-observing external experiences gives way to a more fluid awareness, where the boundaries between inner and outer, self and world, become more permeable. These shifts in the structure of awareness can feel like accessing different realities because they represent fundamentally different modes of consciousness. The awareness that emerges from intensive visualization practice is qualitatively different from ordinary waking consciousness. It's more fluid, more receptive to subtle impressions, more capable of sustaining complex imagery and emotional states. From this perspective, the realities that quantum shifters report accessing might be better understood as different configurations of consciousness, rather than different versions of external reality. Each configuration provides access to different potentials, different emotional states, different perspectives on life and identity. This reframing preserves the genuine novelty and transformative potential of these experiences while grounding them in processes that occur within consciousness itself. It suggests that consciousness contains far more diversity and complexity than we typically recognize without requiring us to invoke external parallel universes. The recursive nature of consciousness also illuminates why these experiences can be so difficult to communicate and validate through conventional means. When consciousness investigates itself, the results are inherently subjective and difficult to verify through external observation. The privacy of consciousness means that transformative experiences remain largely inaccessible to scientific measurement, even when they produce measurable changes in behavior and neural activity. This limitation of external validation doesn't invalidate the experiences themselves. It simply means that we need to develop more sophisticated ways of understanding and evaluating subjective phenomena. We need frameworks that can appreciate both the genuine insights available through first-person investigation and the importance of external validation and critical analysis. Perhaps what quantum shifting practitioners have discovered, despite their theoretical misunderstandings, is that consciousness contains depths and potentials that are rarely explored in ordinary life. Their practices might represent a form of consciousness archaeology, excavating buried capacities and forgotten possibilities within the landscape of awareness itself. As our exploration draws toward a close, take a moment to consider the most practical question of all. What does this understanding mean for how we actually live and grow and transform ourselves? If quantum shifting works through conventional psychological mechanisms rather than quantum mechanical ones, how does this change our relationship to transformative practices? In many ways, this understanding might actually enhance rather than diminish the effectiveness of these practices. When we understand how visualization affects the brain, we can use it more skillfully. When we appreciate how belief influences behavior, we can work with belief more consciously. When we recognize how community provides meaning and support, we can create better communities. The scientific understanding of consciousness and transformation doesn't eliminate mystery, it reveals new depths of mystery. The fact that a collection of neurons can generate the rich inner world of human experience remains one of the most profound puzzles in existence. The fact that focused attention and visualization can produce lasting changes in neural structure and function is genuinely remarkable, even when understood through conventional neuroscience. Perhaps the most important insight from our journey through quantum shifting is that transformation is possible, even if the mechanisms are different from what practitioners initially believed. The experiences of expanded possibility, emotional healing, and shifts in identity reported by quantum shifters point toward genuine capacities within human consciousness that can be cultivated and developed. This suggests a pragmatic approach to transformative practices. Evaluate them based on their effects rather than their theoretical explanations. Does the practice promote psychological health and well-being? Does it enhance rather than diminish your relationship with reality? Does it support your growth as a human being while maintaining appropriate boundaries between subjective experience and objective claims? From this pragmatic perspective, the value of quantum shifting lies not in its quantum mechanical claims, but in its effectiveness as a framework for visualization, goal clarification, emotional processing, and community building. These functions can be preserved and enhanced even when the theoretical framework is updated to align with scientific understanding. This approach also suggests possibilities for developing new practices that combine the insights of contemplative traditions with contemporary scientific understanding. We might create approaches to transformation that are both more effective and more grounded than existing alternatives. Consider how this pragmatic perspective might apply to other areas of your life, where you encounter tension between what feels meaningful and what seems scientifically plausible. How might you evaluate practices and beliefs based on their fruits, rather than their explanatory frameworks? In the end, our investigation of quantum shifting brings us back to some of the most ancient questions humans have ever asked. What is consciousness? How does change happen? What possibilities exist within human experience that we haven't yet explored? How do we navigate between different ways of knowing and understanding? These questions don't have final answers, and perhaps that's exactly as it should be. They remain alive and compelling precisely because they point toward aspects of existence that exceed our current understanding. They invite continued exploration, experimentation, and discovery. The quantum shifting phenomenon, for all its theoretical confusion, has succeeded in drawing attention to these profound questions. It has created communities of people interested in exploring consciousness and transformation. It has generated practices that, whatever their explanatory frameworks, seem to produce meaningful experiences for many practitioners. As we continue to develop more sophisticated understanding of consciousness, neuroscience, and quantum mechanics, we'll undoubtedly discover new ways of thinking about these questions. The frameworks we use today will seem as quaint to future generations as ancient theories of consciousness seem to us now. But the questions themselves will remain. The human impulse to explore the frontiers of consciousness and possibility will continue to generate new practices, new theories, and new forms of understanding. Each generation will find its own vocabulary for these timeless explorations. Perhaps that's the deepest insight available through our investigation of quantum shifting. It represents the eternal human return to questions of consciousness, transformation, and possibility. The specific answers may change, but the questions themselves seem to be woven into the fabric of what it means to be human. As you reflect on everything we've explored together, notice what questions remain alive for you. What aspects of consciousness and transformation continue to feel mysterious and worthy of investigation? How might you continue your own exploration of these territories with both openness and discernment? The journey into understanding consciousness and its relationship to transformation is far from over. Each insight reveals new depths of mystery. Each answer generates new questions. And in that ongoing exploration, we discover not just new knowledge, but new possibilities for what it might mean to be fully human. As you settle into this moment, breathing gently, consider this curious fact. Right now, as you listen to these words, your consciousness is engaged in an act that quantum physicists still cannot fully explain. You are observing. And according to some interpretations of quantum mechanics, the very act of observation might play a fundamental role in shaping the reality you experience. But here's where it gets fascinating. If consciousness influences what we observe, and what we observe influences consciousness, we find ourselves caught in an endless loop where the observer and the observed dance together in ways that challenge everything we thought we knew about the nature of existence itself. Welcome to a gentle exploration of one of the most profound mysteries at the intersection of mind and matter. I'm here to guide you through the strange territory where quantum physics meets consciousness, where scientific observation reveals its own limitations, and where the simple act of paying attention opens doorways to questions that have puzzled humanity for centuries. Tonight, we're investigating the observer's paradox, not to solve it, but to appreciate it. Because sometimes the most beautiful insights emerge not from finding answers, but from learning to dance gracefully with the questions themselves. Take a breath and imagine yourself as a scientist in a perfectly controlled laboratory. You've isolated a single electron and you want to measure its position with absolute precision. You prepare your most sophisticated instruments, calibrate everything perfectly, and make your measurement. The result appears on your screen. The electron is here, at this exact location. But something strange has happened. By measuring the electron's position, you fundamentally altered its momentum. The very act of observation has changed the system you are trying to observe. This isn't a limitation of your instruments or a failure of your technique. It's a fundamental feature of reality itself at the quantum scale. This is where the observer's paradox begins to reveal itself. In classical physics, observation was assumed to be passive. You could, in principle, watch a baseball fly through the air without affecting its trajectory. The observer and the observed existed in separate categories, with clear boundaries between them. But quantum mechanics shattered this comfortable division. At the smallest scales of reality, the act of measurement becomes an interaction that inevitably affects what's being measured. The observer and the observed become entangled in ways that make it impossible to speak of one without reference to the other. Werner Heisenberg, one of the founders of quantum mechanics, expressed this beautifully when he wrote that we cannot observe nature itself, only nature exposed to our method of questioning. The reality we discover through observation is always, in some sense, a co-creation between consciousness and the quantum world. This doesn't mean that consciousness creates reality in some magical way, but it does suggest that the boundary between observer and observed is far more complex and mysterious than our everyday experience suggests. Consider how this might apply to your own experience right now. As you listen to these words, you're not passively receiving information. Your attention, your background of knowledge and experience, your current emotional state, all of these factors influence what you actually hear and understand. The meaning that emerges is neither purely in the words nor purely in your mind, but in the interaction between them. This dance of observation and reality creates a fundamental paradox. How can we study consciousness using consciousness? How can we understand the nature of observation when every attempt to do so requires observation itself? We find ourselves in a hall of mirrors, where every investigation reflects back the very processes we're trying to investigate. Breathe gently and consider what it means to know something with absolute certainty. In our daily lives, we operate as if the world around us exists in definite states, independent of our observation. The chair you're sitting in has a definite position. The temperature of your room has a specific value. These seem like unquestionable facts, but quantum mechanics suggests that at the fundamental level, reality exists in what physicists call superposition, a state where multiple possibilities coexist simultaneously until the moment of observation. The famous thought experiment of Schrödinger's cat illustrates this strange principle. Before you open the box to look, the cat exists in a superposition of being both alive and dead. Only when observation occurs does the system collapse into one definite state. Now, it's crucial to understand that this doesn't mean your thoughts are literally creating reality. The collapse of the wave function, as physicists call it, happens through any interaction that provides information about the system, whether or not consciousness is involved. A simple detector or even random environmental interactions can cause this collapse. Yet something profound remains in this picture. The reality we observe always emerges from a background of infinite possibility. Before measurement, quantum systems exist in a realm of pure potential, where all possible outcomes maintain a ghostly existence simultaneously. This has led some physicists and philosophers to wonder about of consciousness, the role of this process. While mainstream physics doesn't require consciousness to collapse wave functions, some interpretations suggest it might play a special role in selecting which of the many possible realities becomes actual. The physicist Eugene Wigner proposed what's known as the consciousness-based interpretation of quantum mechanics. In this view, consciousness is necessary to complete the measurement process and collapse the wave function. While this interpretation remains highly speculative and lacks scientific consensus, it points toward deep questions about the relationship between mind and physical. As you contemplate reality, plate this, notice how it might change your relationship to uncertainty itself. If reality, at its deepest level, exists in states of superposition until observed, then uncertainty isn't a limitation of knowledge. It's a fundamental feature of existence. The unknown isn't empty space waiting to be filled with facts. It's alive with potential, pregnant with possibilities that exist in a very real sense, until the moment they either manifest or fade away. Take a moment to imagine two particles that have interacted in such a way that they become quantum mechanically entangled. No matter how far apart they travel, measuring one particle instantly affects the state of the other. Einstein famously called this spooky action at a distance, and it troubled him deeply because it seemed to violate the principle that nothing can travel faster than light. Yet decades of experiments have confirmed that quantum entanglement is real. When particles become entangled, they lose their individual identities and become part of a larger quantum system that cannot be described by looking at each particle separately. The whole becomes greater than and fundamentally different from the sum of its parts. This phenomenon raises fascinating questions about the nature of separateness itself. If particles can become so thoroughly interconnected that they lose their individual identities, what does this suggest about the boundaries we perceive in everyday experience? Some contemplative traditions have long suggested that the separation between self and world, between observer and observed, is more apparent than real. The experience of meditation often involves a dissolution of these boundaries, a sense of unity that transcends the ordinary subject-object distinction. While we must be careful not to overextend quantum mechanical concepts beyond their scientific domain, the parallel is intriguing. Both quantum entanglement and contemplative experience point toward forms of connection that transcend the classical notion of separate, independent entities. Consider your own experience of deep attention when you become completely absorbed in something, whether it's a piece of music, a work of art, or a moment in nature. The usual sense of separation between yourself and the object of attention often dissolves. You're no longer simply observing the music. In some sense, you become the music. This isn't mystical speculation, but a recognizable feature of conscious experience. This points toward what we might call the entanglement of experience. The act of observation creates a form of entanglement between consciousness and its objects. We cannot fully separate our experience of reality from reality itself, because the act of experiencing inevitably involves this intimate connection. Research in neuroscience supports this view. When you observe something, your brain doesn't simply create an internal representation separate from the external world. Instead, your neural processes become dynamically coupled with the environment in ways that make the boundary between inner and outer increasingly difficult to define. This doesn't mean that consciousness and reality are identical, but it does suggest that they're far more intimately connected than our everyday experience typically reveals. The observer's paradox emerges precisely from this intimate entanglement between consciousness and the world it observes. As you reflect on this, notice how it might apply to your relationships with others. When you truly listen to someone, when you offer them your complete attention, something more complex than simple information transfer occurs. A form of entanglement develops where your consciousness and theirs become temporarily interconnected in ways that transform both of you. Breathe slowly and consider this remarkable fact. Some of the most sensitive instruments ever created by humans are designed to detect quantum effects and amplify them to macroscopic scales where they can be observed and measured. These devices take the minute, probabilistic events of the quantum world and transform them into signals that can affect entire systems. This amplification principle might provide a clue about how consciousness relates to quantum processes. While individual quantum events in the brain are typically too small and short-lived to directly influence neural activity, some researchers have speculated that biological systems might have evolved ways to amplify quantum effects to biologically relevant scales. The idea remains highly speculative, but it suggests an intriguing possibility. Perhaps consciousness doesn't need to directly control quantum events. Instead, it might involve quantum processes that become amplified through the complex dynamics of neural networks, creating macroscopic effects that influence behavior, decision-making, and experience. This would be analogous to how small changes in initial conditions can lead to dramatically different outcomes in complex systems. A tiny quantum fluctuation, amplified through the non-linear dynamics of neural networks, might influence which thoughts arise, which memories are accessed, or which decisions are made. Again, this remains unproven and speculative, but it points toward ways that quantum processes might be relevant to consciousness without requiring direct quantum control of reality. The amplification occurs within the system of consciousness itself, rather than extending outward to manipulate external quantum events. Consider how amplification works in your own experience. A single word, heard at just the right moment, can sometimes trigger a cascade of thoughts and insights that transform your understanding of a situation. A brief moment of attention can amplify a subtle feeling into a profound realization. Small shifts in perspective can lead to dramatic changes in how you experience reality. This suggests that consciousness might be naturally designed for amplification. We take subtle signals, quiet intuitions, and barely perceptible patterns and transform them into the rich, vivid experience of being aware. The observer's paradox might emerge from this amplification process, where the act of observation doesn't just detect reality, but participates in creating the reality that becomes available to experience. The implications are profound yet humble. If consciousness involves quantum amplification processes, this doesn't grant us magical powers over external reality. Instead, it suggests that the reality we experience is always a collaborative creation between the quantum processes of consciousness and the quantum processes of the world we observe. Take a breath and notice something extraordinary that's happening right now. You are conscious of being conscious. You're not just aware of these words. You're aware of your own awareness of them. This recursive quality of consciousness, this ability to observe itself observing, creates a fundamental loop that complicates any attempt to study consciousness objectively. When consciousness investigates itself, it encounters what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. We can map every neural correlate of awareness, trace every electrochemical process involved in perception and cognition, but we still cannot explain how these physical processes give rise to the subjective experience of being aware. This recursive loop might be intimately connected to the observer's paradox in quantum mechanics. Just as quantum measurement involves an irreducible interaction between observer and observed, the study of consciousness involves an irreducible loop where awareness investigates its own processes. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest that this recursive quality is fundamental to reality itself. The physicist John Wheeler proposed what he called a participatory universe, where observation doesn't just reveal pre-existing facts, but participates in creating the reality that becomes actual. In Wheeler's view, we live in a universe that observes itself in existence through conscious beings like ourselves. This doesn't mean we create reality through wishful thinking, but rather that consciousness and cosmos are partners in an ongoing dance of mutual creation and discovery. Consider how this recursive loop appears in your own experience. When you try to observe your own thoughts, the very act of observation changes the quality of thinking. When you pay attention to your emotions, This attention itself becomes part of the emotional experience. When you notice your awareness, this noticing creates a new layer of awareness that includes the noticing itself. This suggests that consciousness might be inherently paradoxical. It cannot be fully objectified because the act of objectification always involves the subject that cannot itself be objectified. We are always, in some sense, inside the very processes we're trying to understand. The recursive loop of consciousness mirrors the observer's paradox in quantum mechanics. In both cases, the attempt to separate observer from observed, subject from object, breaks down at the deepest levels of investigation. We discover that we are participants in the very reality we're trying to study. This participation doesn't negate the possibility of knowledge, but it does suggest that all knowledge is participatory knowledge. We never observe reality from the outside. We always observe it from within, as part of the very processes we're investigating. As you contemplate this recursive loop, notice how it might transform your relationship to uncertainty and not knowing. If consciousness is fundamentally participatory, then moments of not knowing aren't failures of understanding. They're invitations to participate more deeply in the mystery of awareness itself. Breathe gently and consider one of the most profound insights of quantum mechanics, the principle of complementarity. Niels Bohr discovered that quantum systems can display fundamentally different properties depending on how they're observed. Light can behave as a wave or as a particle, but never both simultaneously. The choice of experimental setup determines which aspect of reality becomes accessible to observation. This principle suggests that reality at the quantum level is richer than any single observation can capture. No single measurement can reveal the full nature of a quantum system, because the act of measurement necessarily excludes other possible observations that would reveal different aspects of the same reality. Bohr extended this principle beyond physics, suggesting that complementarity might apply to many aspects of human experience. Love and justice, freedom and determinism, individual and collective. These apparent opposites might represent complementary aspects of reality that cannot be simultaneously observed, but are both necessary for a complete understanding. This complementarity principle provides a fascinating lens through which to examine the observer's paradox. Perhaps consciousness and physical reality represent complementary aspects of a deeper unity that cannot be directly observed. When we focus on the physical processes of the brain, consciousness recedes into the background. When we focus on the subjective experience of awareness, the physical mechanisms become less apparent. Consider how complementarity appears in your own experience of paying attention. When you focus intently on external objects, your sense of self as observer often becomes transparent. When you turn attention inward to examine the nature of awareness itself, the external world recedes into the background. Both perspectives reveal important aspects of reality, but they cannot be simultaneously accessed in their fullness. This suggests that the observer's paradox might not be a problem to be solved, but a fundamental feature of the relationship between consciousness and reality. The paradox arises because we're trying to apply a single perspective to a situation that requires complementary perspectives. From the physical perspective, consciousness emerges from neural processes and can be studied objectively through neuroscience and psychology. From the experiential perspective, physical reality appears within consciousness as the content of awareness. Both perspectives capture important truths, but neither provides a complete picture. The complementarity principle invites us to hold both perspectives simultaneously without trying to reduce one to the other. Consciousness and physical reality might represent complementary aspects of a more fundamental reality that transcends both mind and matter as we typically understand them. As you reflect on this principle, notice how it might apply to other areas of your life where you encounter apparent contradictions or paradoxes. Rather than trying to resolve these tensions by choosing one side or the other, what would it mean to appreciate them as complementary aspects of a richer reality? Take a moment to consider what happens when you try to measure something as subtle and complex as the meaning of a poem or the depth of a friendship. The very act of measurement seems to change the nature of what you're measuring. A poem analysed too systematically might lose its emotional impact. A friendship subjected to constant evaluation might become strained and artificial. This suggests that meaning itself might be subject to something analogous to the observer's paradox. The act of measuring or analysing meaning inevitably changes the experience of meaning. This doesn't mean that meaning is purely subjective or that all interpretations are equally valid, but it does suggest that meaning emerges through the interaction between consciousness and its objects, rather than existing as a fixed property of either. Research in psychology supports this view. Studies of happiness, for instance, show that people who constantly monitor their emotional states often report lower levels of well-being than those who focus their attention outward. The act of measurement interferes with the natural flow of experience that generates the very quality being measured. This principle might extend to consciousness itself. The more we try to capture the essence of awareness through objective measurement, the more elusive it becomes. Consciousness reveals itself most fully not through analytical investigation, but through direct participation in the process of being aware. Consider how this applies to contemplative practices like meditation. The goal of meditation is not to observe consciousness from the outside, but to participate more fully in the process of awareness itself. The insights that emerge from contemplative practice don't come from measuring consciousness, but from deepening the quality of conscious participation in reality. This participatory approach to understanding consciousness offers a complement to scientific investigation. While neuroscience can map the neural correlates of awareness and psychology can study its behavioral manifestations, contemplative practice explores consciousness from within through direct experience. Neither approach alone provides a complete picture, but together they offer complementary perspectives on the nature of awareness. The observer's paradox emerges when we try to reduce one perspective to the other, when we try to fully objectify what includes the subject within itself. The measurement of meaning points toward a more general principle. Some aspects of reality reveal themselves only through participation rather than detached observation. Love, beauty, meaning, consciousness itself, these might be features of reality that cannot be fully understood from the outside, but only through engaging with them directly. As you contemplate this, notice how it might change your approach to understanding difficult or complex situations in your own life. Sometimes the deepest insights come not from analysing a situation, but from participating more fully in it with awareness and openness. Breathe slowly and notice the quality of your attention right now. Is it focused or diffuse, relaxed or tense, clear or cloudy? The remarkable thing is that attention can observe its own qualities, creating a kind of mirror effect where awareness reflects back on itself. This reflective quality of attention might provide another key to understanding the observer's paradox. When attention turns toward itself, it creates a feedback loop that generates new qualities of awareness. The attention that observes attention is different from simple, outward-directed attention, just as the quantum system that includes the measuring apparatus is different from the system measured in isolation. Research in neuroscience has revealed that different qualities of attention activate different neural networks. Focused attention activates the executive attention network, while open monitoring activates the default mode network. When attention observes its own qualities, yet another network becomes active, creating new patterns of brain activity that don't occur during either focused or diffuse attention alone. This suggests that the act of self-observation doesn't just reveal pre-existing qualities of consciousness, but actually generates new qualities of awareness. The mirror of attention creates new reflections that didn't exist before the mirror was present. Consider how this works in contemplative practice. When you begin to observe the movement of thoughts, this observation gradually changes the nature of thinking itself. Thoughts become less compulsive, less identified with, more transparent. The quality of awareness that emerges from self-observation is qualitatively different from the awareness that existed before self-observation began. This transformation through self-observation might parallel the measurement-induced changes in quantum systems. Just as quantum measurement changes the system being measured, the observation of consciousness changes consciousness itself. The paradox arises because the act of investigation inevitably participates in creating what it discovers. The mirror of attention also reveals the recursive nature of consciousness we explored earlier. Each reflection in the mirror becomes an object for further reflection, creating infinite regress that can never reach a final, objective ground. There is always another level of awareness that includes the previous level within itself. This infinite depth of consciousness might be related to what contemplative traditions call the groundless ground of awareness. The deeper you look into consciousness, the less you find any solid foundation, and the more you discover an open, spacious quality that seems to have no bottom. From this perspective, the observer's paradox points towards something profound about the nature of awareness itself. Consciousness might be fundamentally groundless, not in the sense of being unreal, but in the sense of being an open, dynamic process, rather than a thing or substance. As you reflect on the mirror of attention, notice how this endless reflexivity appears in your own experience. When you observe your observations, what happens? Can you find a final observer that is never itself observed? Or do you discover an open space of awareness that includes all observations within itself? Take a breath and imagine reality as a vast dance of possibilities, where each moment offers countless potential futures that collapse into a single actuality through the mysterious process of observation and measurement. This dance never stops, never reaches a final configuration, but continues to unfold in ever new patterns of possibility and actualization. In this dance, consciousness appears not as a separate observer standing outside reality, but as one of the dancers, participating in the ongoing choreography of existence. The observer's paradox emerges because we keep trying to step outside the dance to watch it objectively, not realizing that stepping outside is just another move within the dance itself. Quantum mechanics reveals that this dance of possibilities is fundamental to reality at every level. Even in seemingly solid objects, particles are constantly fluctuating, appearing and disappearing, existing in superposition until measurement collapses them into definite states. The apparent stability of the macroscopic world emerges from the dynamic dance of quantum possibilities beneath the surface. This vision of reality as process rather than substance aligns with insights from many contemplative traditions. Buddhist philosophy, for instance, speaks of reality as a continuous flow of interdependent processes rather than a collection of separate, substantial entities. The observer and the observed are both movements within this larger flow. Consider how this processual understanding might change your relationship to identity and change. If reality is fundamentally a dance of possibilities, then your identity is not a fixed thing, but a pattern within the dance that can transform and evolve. The boundaries between self and world become more fluid, more permeable, more open to change. This doesn't mean that identity is illusory or that boundaries are meaningless. Patterns within the dance can be quite stable and persistent, but it does suggest that these patterns are dynamic rather than static, relational rather than independent, participatory rather than separate. The dance of possibilities also offers a new way of understanding choice and free will. Rather than seeing decisions as determined by prior causes or as completely random events, we might understand them as creative responses to the field of possibilities available in each moment. Consciousness participates in the dance by responding creatively to what is offered. This creative participation doesn't give consciousness magical power over reality, but it does suggest that awareness plays a genuine role in the ongoing unfoldment of existence. The choices made by conscious beings become part of the larger dance, influencing the field of possibilities available for future moments. As you contemplate this dance of possibilities, notice how it might appear in your own experience right now. Can you sense the field of potential that surrounds this moment? Can you feel your own participation in the ongoing unfoldment of reality through the choices you make about where to direct your attention? Breathe gently and consider consciousness not as an isolated phenomenon, but as part of a larger ecology of observation that includes all the ways reality observes and measures itself. Every interaction between particles, every chemical reaction, every biological process involves forms of measurement and observation that contribute to the ongoing creation of actuality from possibility. In this view, human consciousness represents a particularly sophisticated form of observation, but it's continuous with the observational processes occurring throughout nature. The observer's paradox appears not just in human consciousness, but wherever observation occurs, from quantum measurement in physics laboratories to the information processing that occurs in biological systems. This ecological understanding dissolves the sharp boundary between conscious and unconscious observation. Even simple physical interactions involve a form of observation in the sense that they extract information from quantum systems and collapse superpositions into definite states. Consciousness might be understood as an elaboration and intensification of observational processes that are present throughout nature. Research in biology has revealed that many biological systems display quantum mechanical properties and might even utilize quantum effects for biological functions. Photosynthesis, for instance, appears to use quantum coherence to transfer energy with remarkable efficiency. Some theories suggest that bird navigation, enzymatic catalysis, and even aspects of neural processing might involve quantum effects. While these ideas remain speculative and require further research, they point toward a universe where quantum processes are not isolated in physics laboratories, but are integral to the functioning of complex systems, including biological systems and potentially consciousness itself. This ecological perspective suggests that the observer's paradox is not a problem to be solved, but a feature of reality to be appreciated. We are part of a universe that observes itself into existence through countless forms of observation, from the simplest particle interactions to the most complex forms of conscious awareness. Consider how this ecological understanding might change your sense of your place in the universe. Rather than being separate observers looking at an external world, we might be understood as organs of observation within a larger ecological system that includes us. Our consciousness contributes to the universe's ongoing process of self-observation and self-creation. This doesn't diminish human consciousness, but places it within a larger context of meaning and purpose. We are how the universe becomes conscious of itself, how it develops the capacity for reflection, creativity, and choice. The observer's paradox reflects the universe's own deep structure, where observation and reality are inextricably intertwined. As you reflect on this ecological perspective, notice how it might affect your relationship to the natural world and to other forms of life. If consciousness is part of a larger ecology of observation, what does this suggest about our relationships and responsibilities within this larger system? Take a moment to appreciate that everything we've explored together points toward a fundamental horizon of mystery that recedes as we approach it. Each insight into the nature of consciousness and observation reveals new depths of not knowing, new questions that couldn't even be formulated before the previous questions were explored. This horizon of mystery is not a limitation of human knowledge, but a feature of reality itself. If consciousness and reality are as deeply intertwined as the observer's paradox suggests, then there will always be aspects of this relationship that cannot be fully objectified because they include the subject within themselves. This doesn't mean that investigation is futile or that all perspectives are equally valid. It means that the deepest truths about consciousness and reality might be more like music than mathematics, more like poetry than engineering. They reveal themselves through participation and resonance rather than through detached analysis alone. The horizon of mystery invites a particular kind of humility in approaching questions of consciousness and quantum mechanics. It suggests that the most profound insights might come not from claiming to have solved these mysteries, but from learning to dance more gracefully with them, to participate more skillfully in the very processes we're trying to understand. Consider how this horizon appears in your own experience of learning and discovery. The more deeply you understand any subject, the more you realize how much remains unknown. Each answer opens new questions. Each insight reveals new depths of mystery. This is particularly true when investigating consciousness, where the investigator and the investigated are ultimately the same process. This recursive depth of mystery might be what makes consciousness so fascinating and frustrating to study. Every time we think we've grasped its nature, it reveals new depths, new complexities, new aspects that weren't visible from previous perspectives. The observer's paradox emerges from this inexhaustible depth of consciousness observing itself. Yet this mystery is not empty or meaningless. It's pregnant with possibility, alive with potential insights and discoveries. The horizon of mystery is not a wall that blocks further investigation, but an invitation to continue exploring with ever greater subtlety and sophistication. As you contemplate this horizon, notice how it might transform your relationship to not knowing itself. Rather than seeing uncertainty as a problem to be eliminated, what would it mean to appreciate it as a doorway to deeper understanding? How might embracing the mystery of consciousness enhance rather than diminish your engagement with the questions it poses? Breathe slowly and consider that understanding the observer's paradox is not merely an intellectual exercise, but an invitation to practice observation with greater awareness and skill. If consciousness and reality are as intimately connected as we've explored, then how we observe, the quality of attention we bring to experience, might have profound implications for the reality that becomes available to us. This doesn't mean that we can simply think our way to any desired reality, but it does suggest that the quality of consciousness we bring to each moment participates in shaping what becomes possible within that moment. Attention is not passive reception, but active participation in the ongoing creation of experience. Consider how different qualities of attention reveal different aspects of the same situation. When you observe a sunset with rushed, distracted attention, you might notice only its general beauty. When you observe it with patient, concentrated attention, you might notice subtle changes in colour and light that were invisible before. When you observe it with open, receptive attention, you might experience a sense of connection or wonder that transforms your entire relationship to the natural world. The same external situation, but different qualities of observation reveal different realities within it. This principle might extend far beyond aesthetic appreciation to every aspect of experience, including our understanding of consciousness itself. Contemplative traditions have developed sophisticated practices for cultivating different qualities of attention and observation. These practices suggest that consciousness is not fixed but can be developed and refined through sustained practice. The observer's paradox might be partially resolved through developing more skillful forms of observation that acknowledge their own participatory nature. Meditation, for instance, involves learning to observe the movement of thoughts and emotions without being identified with them or trying to control them. This practice reveals that consciousness has depths and subtleties that are invisible during ordinary states of awareness. It also demonstrates that the act of observation can transform what is observed, but in ways that enhance rather than distort the clarity of awareness. As you reflect on these ideas, you might experiment with bringing different qualities of attention to your immediate experience. What happens when you observe your breath with focused concentration versus open receptivity? How does the experience change when you include your own process of observing within the field of awareness? These experiments don't require special beliefs about quantum mechanics or consciousness. They simply invite direct investigation of the observational processes that are always occurring within awareness itself. Take a breath and notice something remarkable. Despite all the paradoxes and mysteries we've explored, there's a strange coherence that emerges when we stop trying to resolve these tensions and learn instead to appreciate them as features of reality rather than problems to be solved. The observer's paradox, the measurement problem in quantum mechanics, the hard problem of consciousness, the recursive loops of self-awareness, all of these point toward a reality that is more subtle, more participatory, and more mysterious than classical science suggested. But they point toward it coherently, creating a pattern of interconnected insights rather than a collection of isolated puzzles. This coherence doesn't provide final answers, but offers something perhaps more valuable, a way of holding questions that keeps them alive and generative, rather than allowing them to become dead problems that block further inquiry. The coherence lies not in resolution, but in the recognition of deeper patterns that connect apparently separate mysteries. Consider how this coherence might appear in your own experience when you stop trying to figure out consciousness and instead learn to rest in awareness itself. A natural coherence emerges. The paradoxes don't disappear, but they become more like koans that deepen understanding rather than obstacles that block it. This coherent mystery suggests that reality might be fundamentally paradoxical, not in the sense of being contradictory or irrational, but in the sense of including opposites within a larger unity that transcends both. The observer and the observed, consciousness and matter, subjective and objective. These apparent dualities might be complementary aspects of a more fundamental reality. The tradition of quantum mechanics itself demonstrates this kind of coherent mystery. Despite its paradoxical features, quantum mechanics is one of the most successful theories in the history of science. Its strange implications, superposition, entanglement, measurement-induced collapse don't prevent it from making incredibly precise predictions about physical phenomena. Similarly, consciousness remains deeply mysterious despite being the most intimate aspect of our existence. We can't fully explain how it arises from physical processes, yet we can investigate its qualities, cultivate its development, and discover principles that enhance its clarity and depth. The coherence of mystery suggests that some truths are best approached not through analysis that breaks them down into components, but through synthesis that appreciates their wholeness. The observer's paradox might be one such truth, revealing its nature more fully to appreciation than to explanation. As you contemplate this coherent mystery, notice how it might apply to other areas of your life where you encounter paradox or uncertainty. What would it mean to hold these situations with the same kind of appreciative awareness that allows quantum mechanics to remain both mysterious and useful? Breathe gently and consider that perhaps the deepest insight emerging from our exploration of the observer's paradox is that reality calls us to participate rather than merely observe. If consciousness and cosmos are as intimately connected as we've discovered, then skillful participation becomes more important than detached observation. This participation is not the naive belief that we can control reality through wishful thinking, but the mature recognition that we are always already participating in the ongoing creation of experience through the quality of consciousness we bring to each moment. The art lies in learning to participate with awareness, skill, and responsibility. Consider how this art of participation might manifest in daily life. When you listen to someone speak, you're not passively receiving information, but actively participating in the creation of meaning through the quality of attention you offer. When you observe a natural scene, you're participating in a dance between consciousness and beauty that creates the aesthetic experience. This participatory understanding transforms the observer's paradox from a problem to be solved into an art to be practiced. Instead of trying to step outside the dance of observation and reality, we learn to dance more skillfully, with greater awareness of our participation in the ongoing creation of experience. The art of participation includes learning when to focus attention and when to let it remain open, when to analyze and when to simply be present, when to act and when to allow. These are subtle skills that can be developed through practice, but cannot be reduced to mechanical rules. Contemplative traditions have always recognized this participatory dimension of consciousness. They offer practices not for observing reality from the outside, but for participating more fully in the process of being aware. The insights that emerge from such practices don't come from solving the observer's paradox, but from dancing with it more gracefully. As you reflect on the art of participation, notice how it might transform your approach to difficult situations in your own life. Instead of trying to observe your problems from a detached perspective, what would it mean to participate in them with skillful awareness? How might this change your relationship to uncertainty, conflict, or change. The observer's paradox ultimately invites us into this art of conscious participation, where the apparent problems of consciousness studying itself become opportunities for deeper engagement with the mystery of being aware. Take a moment to appreciate the infinite depth that opens when consciousness turns its attention toward itself. Each act of self-observation creates a new level of awareness that can itself become an object of observation, generating an endless spiral of recursive self-awareness that never reaches a final ground. This infinite recursion is not a problem to be solved, but a feature of consciousness that reveals its fundamentally open, groundless nature. No matter how deep you look into awareness, there is always deeper to go. No matter how subtle your observation of consciousness becomes, there is always a more subtle level of observation available. This endless depth might be what contemplatives point toward when they speak of the groundless ground of being. It's not that consciousness lacks foundation, but that its foundation is this very openness, this capacity for endless self-reflection and self-transcendence. The infinite recursion of consciousness mirrors the observer's paradox in quantum mechanics. Just as quantum measurement involves an irreducible loop between observer and observed, self-awareness involves an irreducible loop, where consciousness observes itself observing itself without end. Consider how this infinite depth appears in your own experience. When you observe a thought, there's an awareness that observes the thought. When you observe that awareness, there's a deeper awareness that observes the observing. This process can continue indefinitely, each level, including the previous ones, while pointing toward an even deeper level of inclusiveness. This infinite recursion suggests that consciousness is not a thing or substance, but a process, a dynamic activity of self-reflection and self-transcendence that never reaches completion. The observer's paradox emerges when we try to grasp this process as an object rather than participating in it as an activity. The infinite nature of this recursion also points toward the inexhaustible mystery of consciousness. No matter how much we understand about awareness, there will always be deeper levels to explore, subtler aspects to discover, new dimensions to investigate. This inexhaustibility is not a limitation, but a source of endless wonder and discovery. As you contemplate this infinite recursion, notice how it might affect your relationship to spiritual or contemplative practice. Rather than seeking some final state of understanding or realization, what would it mean to appreciate practice as an endless deepening into the mystery of consciousness itself? Breathe slowly and consider how all the themes we've explored begin to weave together into a larger understanding that transcends any single perspective while including insights from all of them. The observer's paradox, rather than being an isolated problem in quantum mechanics or philosophy of mind, points toward a fundamental feature of reality where consciousness and cosmos co-create each other moment by moment. This emerging synthesis doesn't resolve all mysteries, but provides a framework for holding them creatively. Consciousness appears neither as a separate observer of an external world, nor as a mere product of material processes, but as a fundamental aspect of reality that participates in the ongoing creation of the world it observes. The quantum mechanical insights about measurement and observation, the neuroscientific discoveries about the brain's participatory role in creating experience, the contemplative insights about the nature of awareness. These different approaches converge on a vision of reality as fundamentally participatory rather than simply objective. This convergence doesn't eliminate the need for rigorous scientific investigation or careful philosophical analysis, but it places these approaches within a larger context of participatory knowing, where the knower and the known are recognized as intimately connected. Consider how this synthesis might transform your understanding of knowledge itself. Instead of seeing knowledge as something we possess about an external world, we might understand it as a quality of our participation in the ongoing unfoldment of reality. Truth becomes not a static correspondence between mind and world, but a dynamic attunement between consciousness and the processes it participates in. This participatory understanding of knowledge doesn't lead to relativism or subjectivism, because participation involves discipline, skill, and responsiveness to what is actually present, rather than what we might wish were present. But it does lead to a more humble, open, and creative relationship to truth than purely objective approaches allow. The emerging synthesis also suggests new possibilities for dialogue between scientific, philosophical, and contemplative approaches to understanding consciousness and reality. Rather than competing for final authority, these approaches might be understood as complementary ways of participating in the larger project of understanding our place in the cosmos. As you reflect on this emerging synthesis, notice how it might apply to your own integration of different ways of knowing and understanding. How might you honor both analytical precision and intuitive insight, both careful reasoning and direct experience? Take a breath and notice that, after all our investigation into the observer's paradox, we find ourselves not with final answers, but with a renewed capacity for wonder. The mystery of consciousness observing itself, far from being diminished by understanding, has revealed new depths that invite continued exploration with ever greater sophistication and subtlety. This return to wonder is not a retreat from understanding, but its natural culmination. The more deeply we investigate consciousness and its relationship to reality, the more we discover how much remains unknown and unknowable through conventional approaches. But this unknowing is not empty. It's pregnant with possibility, alive with potential insights and discoveries. So here we are at the end of our gentle exploration into one of the deepest mysteries at the heart of existence itself. We began with the curious fact that observation seems to play a fundamental role in quantum mechanics, and we discovered that this leads us into a labyrinth of questions about the nature of consciousness, reality, and the strange dance between them. The observer's paradox doesn't offer us simple answers, but it offers us something perhaps more valuable, a profound invitation to reconsider our place in the cosmos. We are not separate observers peering at an external world from the outside. We are participants in an ongoing conversation between consciousness and reality, where the very act of being aware contributes to the unfolding of what becomes actual. This doesn't grant us magical powers over the physical world, but it does reveal that the boundary between inner and outer, between mind and matter, between observer and observed, is far more fluid and mysterious than our everyday experience suggests. We discover ourselves to be part of a universe that observes itself into existence through countless forms of awareness, from the simplest quantum measurements to the most complex forms of human consciousness. Perhaps the most beautiful insight from our journey is that mystery itself is not a problem to be solved, but a depth to be appreciated. The recursive loops of consciousness studying itself, the measurement-induced changes in quantum systems, the participatory nature of all observation. These point toward a reality that is inexhaustibly rich, endlessly creative, and fundamentally open to new possibilities. As you move forward from this exploration, carry with you this sense of participatory wonder. Notice how the quality of attention you bring to each moment shapes the reality that becomes available within that moment. Practice the art of conscious participation, where awareness becomes not just a way of knowing, but a way of being that honors both the mystery and the intimacy of existence itself. The observer's paradox ultimately teaches us that we are the universe becoming conscious of itself, engaged in an endless dance of discovery, where each insight reveals new depths of wonder. And in that dance, we find not final answers, but an inexhaustible source of meaning, beauty, and connection that transforms every moment into an opportunity for deeper participation in the magnificent mystery of being aware. Thank you for joining me on this contemplative journey through consciousness and quantum reality. If these questions about the nature of observation and awareness have sparked your curiosity about the deeper mysteries of existence, I invite you to continue exploring with me. Next, we'll investigate an even more profound question that emerges from quantum mechanics. If information is never truly destroyed in a quantum universe, and if consciousness arises from quantum processes, what might this reveal about the continuity of awareness itself? Join me as we explore Are You Already Immortal? The quantum theory that changes everything. Quantum theory that changes everything.